This is our first focus lesson on Chapter 1, Section 7. You should be on page 50 of your textbooks. This is going to be pretty quick, but it's very important because the distributive property is what we're talking about, and the distributive property is used in a lot of different areas of algebra. So looking at 17, you've got 3 minus 8c parentheses 1.5, and this might be a notation that we are not used to. So let's look at an example. It says problem 1 is it, so let's look at problem 1 and see what this is talking about. In problem 1, it gives us 3 parentheses x plus 8, and again it wants us to look at this, but again this is similar to what we have, the numbers just in a different location. But what this means is that you're actually taking 3 times the whole thing of x plus 8, and you notice that it breaks it down to 3 times x, which would be like putting these two together, plus 3 times 8, which would be like putting these two together. When you simplify that, 3 times x turns into 3x, 3 times 8 turns into 24. Looking at the other example, which is more like what we have 5b minus 4 in a group with negative 7 on the outside. Again, this is getting multiplied. Notice that it ends up as 5b times negative 7, which again is like that outside number getting multiplied, minus 4 times negative 7, which is what we have if that was to meet the second number. 5 times negative 7 is negative 35 with the b, and then negative 4 times negative 7 is a positive 28. So let's go back up here and see what we can do. I think the best way to do the distributive property is to draw the connections and write it out. So I'm going to connect these two, which means I'm going to do 3 times 1.5. I myself always like to use a plus so that I don't get confused, so I use a plus to connect it, and then I just put negative 8c on the inside of one parentheses, and I multiply that with what's on the outside, which is 1.5 again. All I have to do now is make sure I know what the answers are. 3 times 1.5 is 4.5. This answer here, a negative times a positive, is going to be negative, and 8 times 1.5 is 12. And because there is a c there, we simply bring that down. So the key thing here is knowing that you're going to take each one of these numbers on the inside times the outside number. Just be careful about the negative, because that's where most of the things fall apart when people do their distributive work. 19 shows us 1/4 times 4f minus 8. And so we again have a number on the outside that needs to meet up with everything here. So 1/4 will meet up with 4f. I again like to use the plus. 1/4 will then meet up with negative 8. Now again, we've talked about multiplying and dividing, all that, but the trick here whenever you have a whole number times a fraction is that the number simply just goes up to the top. And so we take 4f times 1, which would be the same as 4f over 4. The bottom number stays the same, and here you end up with negative 8 moving up to the top times 1, which gives us minus 8 over 4. Simplifying this, 4 over 4 of course goes away, giving us f minus, and then 8 divided by 4 is 2. So again, that is the distributive property, the general idea behind the distributive property, which is just working with taking the outside number times everything on the inside. Looking at the second section in this work, we're looking at 27 and 29, and you notice that these look kind of like fractions, and so let's see what happens whenever we turn these into fractions. We have 8 over 9x, or sorry, 8 minus 9x over 3. And so let's check out and see what problem 2 does to deal with the fact that we have these fractions. They give us 7x plus 2 over 5, and the first thing they do is they rewrite as 7x plus 2 in parentheses with 1/5 on the outside, and I think that would be an easy shift for us. So pretty much what they're saying is, since 5 is on the bottom, it's the same as 1/5. They're multiplying by 1/5. So let's see if we can apply that here and then work this out. That means that this should turn into 1/3 times 8 minus 9x. And if we do that appropriately, again, this will turn into 1/3 meeting 8 plus 1/3 meeting negative 9x. Remember again that when you multiply by a whole number, the number goes to the top, so that will be 8 over 3. This is a positive times a negative, which would be minus. Again, that 9x is getting multiplied by 1, so it'll be 9x over 3. And even though this can't be reduced, 9 over 3 can. 9 divided by 3 is 3, so you end up with 8 over 3 minus 3x as your final answer there. So get used to ugly numbers. They are not going to go away, and this book is going to give you plenty of them to work with. Just make sure you understand what's going on. 29 says 25 minus 8t over 5. And again, using the same concept as what we just learned here, it means we're going to take this, and since 5 is on the bottom, we're going to turn that into 1/5 times 25 minus 8t. It means that we're going to now take this 1/5 and multiply it by both, so 1/5 gets multiplied by 25, and, which I always put a plus there, 1/5 gets multiplied by negative 8t. Taking the whole number to the top of the fraction, you get 25 over 5. This is going to be a positive times a negative, which would be a negative 8t. Remember, it just gets sent to the top over 5. And even though 8 over 5 can't be reduced, 25 over 5 can, so we end up with 5 over 8t over 5. So again, when you see this later on, if you have the fraction, it's just the same thing as taking this and turning it into 1/5, just like dividing by 3 is the same as multiplying by 1/3. We have one more thing to look at before you get some work to do, and we are going to look at those now. 35 gives us negative parentheses 9 minus 7c. Now this is a very simple problem. You just have to make sure you understand what's going on when you see it. So let's look at problem 3 and see what they're telling us. It says using the multiplication property of negative 1, and it wants to know what the simplified form of negative 2y minus 3x is. And if you go to the work, it looks to me again like it made a simple shift. It simply said, remember the invisible number in algebra is 1, that if the negative is there, that it's like distributing a negative 1, which to me just simply means that it looks like you're taking the opposite of positive 2y as negative 2y, and the opposite of negative 3x as positive 3x, but we'll do it the same way for the sake of our notes. Just make sure you understand what the process is, because in all honesty, remember that the negative means opposite of, so you're simply taking the opposite of 9 and the opposite of negative 7c. But again, what the book does is when they see a negative, they put a negative 1 on the outside of that to give us an actual number to work with. Now we're going to take negative 1 and meet it up with 9, and since this is a negative, I don't want two signs together, so negative 1 meets negative 7c. Negative 1 times 9 is negative 9. A negative times a negative is a positive 7c. And again, if you look at it, this was a positive 9 on the inside that turned into a negative 9. This was a negative c on the inside that turned into a positive 7c. So you can do it by turning into it using that negative 1, but the best way to view it is just take the opposite of 9 and the opposite of negative 7c, and that way you'll understand what's going on no matter what. 39 gives us something pretty close. It just gives us 3 terms, so negative m plus n plus 1. So really all it's doing is, instead of giving us 2 terms, it's giving us 3 terms and making sure we understand what's going on. So again, following what the book did, it turned the negative into negative 1 times everything on the inside. And then that negative 1 meets up with everyone, so negative 1 meets negative m. And, again, I always use a plus. Since that's a negative, I'm going to put negative 1 in parentheses, meeting n. And, again, which means plus, negative 1 meets 1. Negative times a negative makes a positive m. Negative times a positive makes a negative n. And negative times a positive makes a negative 1. This should be my answer. And again, if you check it, the opposite of negative m is positive m. The opposite of positive n is negative n, and the opposite of positive 1 is negative 1. So if you can take a moment now to get some practice on all this stuff, this is what you are looking at here for section A of your focus lessons: 12, and then 18 through 30 even, and then 34, 36, and 40.